Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. Now I have to admit, I'm a football nut, and I want to introduce you, if I haven't done already in another presentation, to my attack and defence approach to history. Like most football fans, myself included, it's very simple. A goal is scored. Do you praise the attack or blame the defence? Well, it's the same with wars. One side wins, another side loses. Did the winning side get key things right? Or did the losing side get too many key things wrong? Or was it a mixture of both? That's going to be my approach in this presentation on the Vietnam War. Now it overlaps with my presentation on American tactics, but I don't think there's any harm in that. Well, you can spin it as much as you like, but America lost the war, and the Vietcong won it. So what did the Vietcong get right? Guerrilla warfare meant a war of attrition, and it was the right war for them to fight. The enemy couldn't be defeated militarily, but it could have its morale, its will to fight, slowly eroded. As Val Nguyen Giap put it, and he was the leading Vietnamese general in both the French War as well as the war with America, and was responsible for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Their aim was to break America's will to continue the war. The aim of guerrilla warfare, then, is not to defeat the enemy in open battle, but to wear down the enemy's morale. The tactic in Vietnam was to retreat when the enemy attacks, raid when the enemy camps, attack when the enemy tires, pursue when the enemy retreats. They would also set booby traps or plant explosives and make surprise attacks. In this way, the enemy would be worn down and demoralized. What's more, as soldiers repeatedly recalled, the American GI simply didn't know his enemy. Just who was a peasant and who was a guerrilla soldier was impossible to tell. They would attack and then disappear into the villages, or else, particularly along their supply routes, like the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they would melt into the jungle. And in both the Mekong Delta and the demilitarized zone, they could also hide in the networks of tunnels they had built. These tunnels could be incredibly complex and include storage facilities, kitchens, and even hospitals. So, guerrilla warfare succeeded in making the experience for American soldiers something akin to a living nightmare. And this leads to my second point, morale. The American GI was young, he was conscripted, and he was a long way from home, in an environment, whether in the city or the countryside, that he didn't understand and didn't like. In sharp contrast, the morale of the Vietcong, their determination to win through, no matter how much they had to suffer, was quite phenomenal. The hardship, the mounting death toll, the bombing campaigns, nothing could break their spirit. They were fighting for the independence of their country. What's more, the Vietcong were careful to win the hearts and minds of the peasantry. Though they were fighting a war, they tried to treat the peasants with respect. They would even help in the fields at planting or harvesting. Many, of course, were peasants themselves. They were fighting amongst and for their own people. However, against those who collaborated with the enemy, the police, tax collectors, teachers, and other government employees, or ordinary peasants, they were ruthless, and thousands were killed. America too tried to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese peasants. For example, American army doctors provided medical services in the villages. But American tactics to win the war was another thing altogether, and it stood in sharp contrast to those of the Vietcong, and meant that the Vietnamese people would never be won over. America tried to use its technological superiority to its advantage, but in truth it gave little advantage on the ground. I would draw attention to 3 specific tactics, each making use of America's superior air power: conventional bombing, chemical bombs, and making use of helicopters in search and destroy missions. You want to make sure you have a little material to illustrate how each of these tactics actually worked against the Americans, to the point where their own people questioned the war. How could it be justified? Operation Rolling Thunder, the linebacker bombing campaigns, the use of Agent Orange and napalm, My Lai as the worst example of search and destroy. Americans turned against the war. There was the loss of young Americans, the costs of the war, and a questioning of the morality of the war. And we should note that this was the most televised war in history. Night after night, Americans could see the horrors of the war on their television screens. And the Vietcong's Tet Offensive, even though it failed badly, showed that America wasn't winning the war, as they were being told they were. Americans saw the nature of the war on their television screens, and read about it in their newspapers, as did the rest of the world. Prisoners being tortured, some being executed on the streets, by South Vietnamese, not American GIs, but it was America's presence that allowed these things to happen. Women and children helplessly watching their homes set on fire as a result of the search and destroy missions. Children burning as a result of napalm bomb attacks. The poisoning of unborn babies as a result of Agent Orange. And then in the spring of 1969 came the news of the My Lai massacre. It really was the worst imaginable horror movie, except this was for real. Anti-war protests were held all over America. Young Americans led the way on the streets. Not surprisingly, it was they who stood to be drafted. But their parents weren't happy about the war either. So, a sketch of the key factors for you. This is one of those topics where descriptive detail can really add to your work. You'll find plenty of that in my ebook on containment that you can get on Amazon. But as I always say, that really is up to you. All I would say right now is thanks so much for listening, and the best of luck with your studies. I hope you're enjoying the course. I do think the topics you study are interesting and important. But for now, cheers.